introduce our panelist. Ms. Lauren Puwalis is a principal at Deloitte Consulting. She has more than 20 years experience successfully delivering large-scale strategy and operations programs with state, local, and federal agencies. She is a lead consulting partner of the state of Georgia, managing multiple projects with the City of Atlanta, City of Decatur. Lauren has a bachelor's degree in international business from Florida State University, an international business degree from London School of Economics. So large experience. She also represents an agency that has a lot of engagements across the world in this space, from Spain to Netherlands to Mexico to the United States. So I hope Lauren is not only a panelist, not only a moderator, but also a panelist. Not only questions, but hope to hear a lot of your perspective on what's going on around the globe in this space as well. So please welcome Lauren Puwalis.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get the fun started. So that was very kind. So as I was said, I'm Lauren Puwalis. So thank you all for coming tonight. You know, I think we've heard already that there's a ton of opportunity and lots of activities going on in the world of smart cities with regard to transportation. At Deloitte, we really take a look at it from a global scale. You know, we're a global firm, and what one can say specifically is that the convergence of telecommunications, IT, government, state, investment, transportation, you name it, is all coming together, and the disruptors that are out there are, quite frankly, making it a little bit of a headspin for a lot of us in the industry to figure out where to grab for and what to do next. And I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are coming all together, regardless of what firm, company, nonprofit, state, local government we're in, to make this better. Because at the end of the day, it's for the citizenry, right? It's also to embetter the urban infrastructure that, quite frankly, is overloaded at this point. So with that in mind, we've got a set of panelists that are going to talk a lot about certain things based on the questions that I've got, and hopefully we'll get some good questions from you all. We do not have answers for all of this stuff, right? So at the end of the day, I think because of the complex nature of it, so many opportunities to sort of make the world better in this environment. So we've got our panelists here. We've got George Ayers from IBM. We've got Yasir Qureshi from Cisco and Matt Foreman from AT&T. But before they come up, I'm going to have George. He wants to say a couple of things from his perspective, and then we'll bring everybody up, and then we'll get this question started.
Thank you, Lauren. Great to be here. Great group. I already met some interesting people. Thank you very much for having me. My name is George Ayers. I'm with IBM Digital Operations. I've been at IBM 1 year this month. So one thing I learned right away is you always have to have some slides if you're an IBM person. So I was told to do that. So when I was asked to speak on this topic, I was thinking about smart cities generally, and then I started thinking a little bit more about what I've been involved in around cities, certainly not all of it. My center of gravity is automotive. So I've been in the automotive industry for 30 years, 25 years at car companies, and the last 6, 7 years with connected vehicles primarily. So really interesting, Tim. Appreciate your presentation. I've been kind of involved in some of that, not quite as far back as you, but thank you. My conclusion, though, is that smart cities are going to happen with or without the government's activity. Cars are smart, they're connected, they're going to connect to each other, they're going to connect to infrastructure one way or another. Buildings are already connected, right? Homes are already connected. Consumers are buying products right now to connect things in their home, to their car, to their office. So it's happening anyway. And I think our job is trying to help the governments and municipalities figure all this out and put it all together, and I think that's what's really exciting. So just wanted to mention from an IBM point of view, of course, it's not just about the device or the wireless connectivity, it's about the intelligence on top of that, use of data and analytics, predictive ideas, all kinds of things you can do once you collect all that together. But it's pretty messy right now, right? Lots of different platforms, lots of different protocols, as Tim mentioned, for example. So our job is to figure all that out, and it's really great to be here. And I hope to work with many of you as we do that. So, and then last slide, hopefully you can see it, which is how do you enable smart city opportunities really stay open, use open systems. We do that at IBM quite a bit. Cognitive, have a strategy, make it real, and continue to learn and develop. So hopefully we'll have many more of these discussions, and we'll all get much better as we go along. Thank you very much.
Why don't you come on up and introduce yourself, give the audience a little bit about you and your background so we can get started with the questions.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Lauren. And it says my form, but I'm actually Mike Zito with AT&T Smart Cities. So those of you who know Mike know he sends his regards and wanted to be out here. But the team that Mike runs is the Smart Cities team in the broader AT&T Internet of Things. I run our market development, so touching product and business strategy, some different program management and special projects, and had a privilege of working with many of the folks, both in the room as well as up here, and looking forward to going deeper tonight. Thanks.
Great. And Yasir Qureshi from Cisco? Sure. You're next up.
So thanks for having me here. Yasir Qureshi with Yasir Qureshi with Cisco. I lead a team in Cisco that is in charge of a segment called Service Provider IoT. So we specifically look at catering to solutions and offers in partnership with companies like AT&T's and other telecom operators globally of the world. So specifically on telecom operators with respect to IoT.
Thank you. And we've heard from George. You want any other comments you want to make about yourself?
No. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. All right, so now we get down to the questions. And it was kind of, we were joking around because we were like, did we get the questions out like the debate? Or you keep them, sort of behind the scenes? They all know what the questions are. But anyway, just...
Jeopardy, like we have to buzz.
we have to buzz.
It's a
No,
panel, not a
I
debate.
know. We're sort of living in the alternative universe world. So, okay, so you've heard the panel, and we've got such great sort of folks sitting out here with lots of expertise. So here's the first question that I'll pose to my colleagues and to you all to think about. What are the industry trends? And that can take a bunch of forms, right? It can be in big data, it can be autonomous vehicles, it can be IT or telecom. What are the industry trends that you all are seeing that various entities, and that might be federal, state, local governments, are discussing options for how smart city approach will be useful to them? Jump ball, who goes first?
I'll go.
All right.
Obviously, you guys read about all these trends as well as I do. Lots of different things going on. Car companies have been connected for 20 years now. This year, General Motors is at OnStar. So they have some experience. Every single one of them has a program at this point. But they've kind of moved beyond make money to use the data. And so they want to get that information. City governments, I've talked to a few, not as many as I'd like yet, but I'm going to work on that. Are saying, well, autonomous, what can I do now? Does that mean I don't need parking garages? Do I need all kinds of different infrastructure? And they're doing their 5- and 10-year plans based around the idea that there's a little pod that's going to pick people up and drop people off, and a very different idea. The interconnectivity of everything is moving so fast that everybody's realized that has to happen. But the problem is everybody's got old systems and platforms, and sometimes they clash and they don't work together. And as I said at the beginning, that's I think the big job that we have is to help cities and metropolitan governments do that. But those are big trends. Go ahead.
Anyone else?
No, yeah, I would say, first of all, definitely agree with you, and I'd go back to, in fact, to the last hearing from the Senate committee, right, on the Digit Act. I mean, if you look at, just in general, even if you look at the dollar opportunity, some of the numbers that they threw out there were very interesting. It was like $1.2 trillion in terms of productivity savings with driverless cars. 25 gigabytes of data generated by a car per day. Right, I mean, that in and of itself speaks a lot. And at Cisco, at least, we view car pretty much as the data center on wheels. And so security is right at the foundation of everything that we think of when we think IoT and transportation. And I think another key trend that at least we notice with that much data, that much requirement for connectivity, and when you look at the regulations around globally with data sovereignty and latency requirements to take intelligent decisions right at the edge, I think there's a very pervasive demand to have ubiquitous compute, right? So compute capability at the edge of the network, in the fog of the network, in the cloud. So I think those are some key trends that we've been noticing in the transportation segment.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, so I think if you had AT&T up here a couple years ago, you would have heard a mantra, and still very much today in some places, right? You would have heard a mantra around, regardless of the question you asked, the answer would have been cellular, right? And I think what we're really seeing is an evolution in the industry, really, frankly driven probably by a lot of the different players in this room, the startup space, and different connectivity options presenting themselves for different needs. When you think about bandwidth or throughput or mobility, battery life, all these different things result in a different type of network potentially for that specific device. So I think the largest trend is kind of the acceptance and embrace of this multi-network strategy, right? AT&T just put a white paper out there pretty recently, kind of talking through like low power, wide area, and DSRC, and some of these different technologies out there helping to connect. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but I think that's shows a large evolution for AT&T and representative of the industry, of these players coming together. We're doing some work with the Department of Transportation for the Smart Cities Challenge, and one of the things there is very DSRC standards based, right? That's where a lot of the DOT work is going. But they're embracing LTE to serve kind of as a complement together, and there's probably 3 different use cases that those work really nicely together. So instead of seeing these kind of one or the other in positioning, I think you're starting to see a lot more embrace of there's a very much a rising tide, right, and a big pie to be had, and figuring out how we can work on the industry side to make it easy to present an integrated, holistic solution for the cities, municipalities to come in and deploy, and that's what's really driving a lot of growth that we're seeing.
So, it's funny, I'll just add, ditto, right? How about that? But I would say, from a Deloitte perspective, we're also seeing a big trend in sort of the customer experience piece, right? I mean, everybody wants their information immediately, and in the transportation and smart city world, they want to know, when is the light going to change, or when can I go park my car here, or where's the next bike, or when is the taxi coming? And so a lot of this has to do with sort of the appeasement of just sort of like making sure that things are easier for the consumer. So as we are all thinking about what the right technology platforms are, we can't lose sight of the fact that, at the end of the day, the push for all of this is to make things a better place to live in. So that's another big industry trend that, we've been seeing a lot of. So, okay. Next question. So kind of in the same vein, but sort of slightly different, because I think it segues very nicely. So how much dependence are you seeing for a multi-modal approach and a blended technology solution in the smart city environment? So it's pretty complex, but...
I'll jump first, I'll bite. I don't know that dependence is the right word, or would be representative of kind of some of the conversations we're having at a mayoral or CIO or CTO level with some of these cities. I think historically, and very much today still, as we all are sensitive to, right, cities are very siloed with different P&L and operations. So, when you're talking about if we're talking about Atlanta, the MARTA system and the implications there, their 20-year strategy probably doesn't overlap with the highway build-out, and overlap with the smart parking procurement roadmap, and overlap with the deployment of DSRC radios to support autonomous vehicles. So kind of like we were talking about with bringing the industry together in that multimodal section, multi-network, I should say, multi-network. On the multi-network side, I think you're starting to see a lot of the different city departments come together in a way they haven't, being driven by these conversations, because there's just unprecedented, Lauren, to your point, value to be captured and delivered for the citizens that, frankly, if these cities aren't having those conversations, citizens and talent and enterprises are going to go elsewhere. So I don't think we're there yet in the conversations I'm having, where cities are driving and pushing the industry. I think, to the point that was made before, I see a lot of the industry trying to push the cities where the org structure might not be there yet. Atlanta's realigned their org structure. We've done some work with them, right? So it's going in the right direction. But when I think, like, what's a consumer experience for a truly multimodal transportation, commute to work, that's where, when I'm getting up in the morning, I know the parking availability, not only in the city, but at the MARTA station, and variable pricing that drives me to the MARTA station, so that based on the traffic that's on the road that day, I'm more incentivized to go park there, make parking easy there, take that single point of transit in, keep cars off the road. So I think it's, if we're putting our future hats on, we'll get there, and we're seeing it. But
I think it's actually true that they're still structurally not talking to each other, right, in the cities. But, catalysts like the DOT grant energized a bunch of cities. I was in Texas A&M in May, and Texas Transportation Institute had an event, and one of the guest speakers, the main speaker, was the mayor of Austin, who is very progressive, and give a whole presentation. This was before the finalists, and they were down to the 7 cities.
Before they kicked out Uber.
Right. 7 cities left out of 40-something, I think it was, right? And to get the $40 million.
74 cities applied.
74, right. Huge number. So they're down to like the final 7, and then they went another couple weeks, and then they picked somebody else, unfortunately. But so he was, making the case, and he was, moving mountains to get groups to talk to each other to make that happen. And he was thinking way out there. And so there's some out there, I think, that are pretty innovative that we need to be talking to and working with.
No, I would completely agree. I think a common thing that we always see are all the silos in the different government departments, right? I actually have been pretty much grew up in Atlanta, and about 10 years ago I moved. Cisco moved me from Atlanta to Dubai, and a lot of these silos just don't exist. And very selfishly, for any time my team or we wanted to try out a new solution, a new pilot, it was just so much more easy to deploy smart city solutions because those silos don't exist. And Dubai is one example, Singapore is another, and there are many others out there. So I just think that technology is an enabler, but always found the biggest challenge to actually be these government silos. Obviously there is technology, different authentication techniques, and a lot of other stuff to kind of enable the data brokerage for them to work together. But we just really need to somehow manage those silos and kind of get rid of some of our cultural things that keep us in those silos.
Well, good segue to the next question, which is, how do you think governments, because we all know that the governments obviously have a big hand in this, right? And governments are at multiple levels. How do you think governments will help or hinder the entry into the smart city market for our collective industry? And what have been some examples of successes that you've seen thus far?
I'll nibble. Robert, I'm coming to you, so get ready. You're on standby. So we'll bring it home here to Atlanta, right? I think it's that org structure, and I think where we've seen the most success is a visionary leader who's probably motivated by quick election cycles, so driving, progress and change. We laugh, right? But when you're able to tell an environmental sustainability story, an economic development story, a public safety story, and a cost savings and optimization story, all from one deployment that, oh, by the way, may or may not even pay for itself with its own energy savings, it's very compelling, right? So where we've seen a lot of success, or at least the most success, is that visionary leader who can align the troops behind them and set up the organization the same way. And to your point, right, the Smart Cities Grant Challenge, I think, started a lot of conversations, and we were heavily involved and are getting pulled into and continue to be involved in multiple cities that didn't move forward. Right. But the conversation stays alive, and maybe not to the degree of, hey, we have an influx of 50 million from the DOT and an extra 100 from the private sector, but to some degree, a lot of these cities are finding ways to have those see light. So I think that's the biggest thing, going back to the previous point, setting up that organizational structure. We're doing a project out here in Atlanta. Lauren, you were very involved in that, right, with Lloyd, on just helping the city get data and understand data and the meat of what's going on in a specific geography that's going to be kind of like a test bed area to prove out interoperability of different technologies so that we're not buying in a point siloed manner and then 3 years and $800 million down the line realize system A doesn't talk to system B. So it's actually very intelligent and progressive how Atlanta's approaching that, right? But just to be able to get data from sister organizations and pull that in a meaningful way, cities just aren't set up to share it that way today, right? And the processes and the governance is not there. So I think that'll be the biggest thing.
I think also one of the drivers for progress is cities trying to attract, people, certain kinds of people, and they do live, work, play communities that they want to organize features for people who expect these things, young people. Atlantic Station in Atlanta, there's places like that all over the country where there's lots of opportunities for little smart mini areas within the city, and they need that because those folks want to move there or don't, depending on what's there. And so I think the progressive cities are doing that.
Well, one of the things I'd say also is, and maybe it falls into the bucket of hindrance, is, governments by design are not as nimble or flexible as the private industry. And, we can talk at another forum about why that is. But the reality is when you have something like smart cities where the technology is moving so fast and you have to converge so many different parts, the hindrance will be that a Department of Transportation or a city or a mayor who may be completely enthralled with the idea may not be able to move as fast as he wants to procure the services that they want. So one of the things that maybe in this room we can chat about, depending on any of the questions that come forward, is, how can we help how do we think about this in a way to monetize? And again, it's not all about revenue, but in the end, they have to purchase services to kind of get to the end game. And that comes through some of this traditional RFPs and procurements, but there are some things that we can help them think about in terms of how they can almost make more progressive their acquisition policies, because this stuff is going to turn so quickly that by the time they get through something, it's already sort of past time. So that's something that, we're dealing with. I mean, Matt and I have dealt with this, and I'm sure all of you all have, where, everybody's excited, but 6 months later, and you're like, well, that sensor really is outdated now, right? You can find, or a different data analytics component is on top now. So I think what will save them is the citizenry is not going to put up with the slowness of it. So I think things will catch up over time.
Yeah, I was just going to give a specific example, right, to your exact point. So Hardik Bhatt is the CIO of the state of Illinois, and he's putting in place procurement vehicles that the cities can go right on top of to help expedite that cycle, right? Because some of these small cities aren't necessarily set up to deal with that complexity. Chicago is going to go do its own thing, obviously, and they have Brenna Berman out there who's running a lot of that and doing some great stuff. But that's just one specific example around procurement where we're actually seeing cities be very innovative in how they're kind of setting up that procurement contracting to enable the success and bring these technologies to some of these other areas as well.
One other thing, we found our chambers of commerce have been really, really helpful, right? So for those of you all who are sort of thinking about it, right, because they have the ear of the business community and quite frankly the state and local community, and they are very much more sometimes at the point of being able to cut through some of the red tape, overused term, but and kind of get to some results. So something else to kind of consider. Anything else up here? Yasir, what do you got?
I already mentioned it in my previous one. So I do think that in general, kind of working, actually completely agree with you on the Metro, especially Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, right? They've been extreme. We actually recently formed what we call a city working group, and we've been working with Mike Zito and AT&T on that as well. And the Metro has been extremely helpful in actually kind of pulling that off and forming a pseudo PPP type of an arrangement for us. So.
Gotcha. Well, I think we have probably time for one more question up here before we turn it over for Q&A. So I guess, one of the questions that I'll ask you is, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing within your industry to convince the folks that in your particular industry that you need to make changes? Is there anything that's causing trouble in your industry, or is everybody in sort of like the futuristic thinking mode.
So it's all perfect.
Yeah, this is being recorded, right?
I would say, thinking big enough, right? A lot of cities want to get on and do something. Like you said, the election cycle, very, very true. Something small, demo pilot, proof of concept, let's go do something. Think a little bigger and a little more comprehensive, but then that slows them down because they have to get more people involved, et cetera. So, how can we hold their hand to help them do that? And really good point about small governments, small cities, they do not have the people to do that. How can I build something that I can replicate all over the country, make it super easy for them? We like to say end-to-end solutions, right? Things like that. Various places. Oregon has been working on road use charging for, over 10 years, right? And they're implementing it now, those kinds of things. Why are they doing that? Because gas tax, they don't have the revenue from that, so they're solving this one problem. But Oregon as a state, Portland as a city, very progressive in a lot of other ways and doing a lot of different things. But we need to help them, I think a little bigger sometimes than they do. Because they just want to get started, because an American say, I'm doing this and this. But more comprehensive, I think, is a good thing down the road if we can help them do that.
I think for us, we're doing more partnering, right? I mean, Deloitte is a worldwide consulting firm, and we are excited about this opportunity because we don't have all of the full answers, and I'm on tape for this, right? We're being recorded. But I think the partnering is really important because we're doing a lot of work with AT&T, and we are working with Cisco, and quite frankly, IBM as well. And, I think it's going to be an all play. So one of the things that we'll all have to sort of figure out from a governance perspective is how can we pull everybody together, and sort of, it's almost like, government first or citizenry first, and then you worry about what's going on with the firm second. So we're going through a lot of prototype conversations and, fail fast so that you can keep doing something different. So we're doing a lot of that.
Yeah, I would say, just you said everything's not about money, but I think it's the road to monetization in smart cities, right? Working with cities and kind of, there's a lot of value at stake and productivity gains to be had, etc. But a lot of public companies are frankly just very short term, focused on the short to mid-term revenue, and I think that. I think if we could take a more holistic view and kind of looking at the bigger picture would help resolve a lot of those challenges. And it's to George's earlier point, right? We've a common thing in Cisco these days is we've just done too many POCs and pilots, right? I mean, we just gotta do something real now.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we are at time. Do you all have questions? Oh boy, yes you do. All right, so if I'm hearing you correctly for the panel, the question being with all of the requests that are coming through, how can we utilize the most compelling need to get maybe the cities and states to kind of make a move? Does that cover it? Okay.
Well, I'll take a stab. So, part of it is the customer experience. Somebody mentioned that earlier. I think Lauren mentioned that, right? Customer experience is so good that people don't do the other alternatives. And you can imagine a city thinking about, how do I do that? How do I create the customer experience that will knock people's socks off? Instead of water management, energy management, all kinds of other infrastructure, picking up the trash, et cetera, that they have to get done, right? They have to get it done anyway. Many of the POCs that we all do are in those spaces where they have to get those things done anyway. But I think when they go back to becoming the most livable city, attracting, getting growth and things like that, they realize that they have to do these customer-centric ideas. And I think the only way they can get it done at the end of the day is to partner with companies to make these things happen. We've seen parking companies, all kinds of other companies with cities, so it's just really easy. I've been to lots of towns, like I'm sure you guys have, where everything's wired and connected when I need to park, and some there it's not. I was in a beach town in California not long ago, and I had to look for quarters in my car to park.
And you hope that it's jammed because you don't have one?
Yeah, exactly.
And you were there for a smart city.
Yeah, exactly. I stayed an extra week, too. It was great.
Well, one of the things also to consider, so what we do is we find the clients that are sort of the change in the first movers, right? And we spend a lot of time understanding what it is that they're trying to actually do, and then this is going to sound esoteric, but then we learn sort of what their procurement rules are, right? Because there's a certain threshold that they can sort of start doing something as a sole source without bringing in the cavalry of acquisition and procurement. And so usually what happens is if you can get in the door and do something that's real small based on one of the priorities, and it's not a lot of money, but I realize monetization is really important, but you got to start. And then once you're in, you can start to kind of push the envelope. But the biggest problem is entry point. So, that's again, not so much a technology solution, so much as an approach with the clients and learning about sort of how you can get in for that small first bit.
I think just also in general, if you look at some of the leveraging the newer business models, right? It's all about as a service, it's all about consumption business models. I think kind of offering a lot of these things to cities initially, and whether it's smart parking as a service or smart lighting as a service, etc. We've seen that really getting them going. And obviously I've worked with AT&T, but in general globally, working with telecom operators as one of the main, one of the core players in actually enabling that comes real handy, and that's really helped us accelerate a few of these deployments.
That's a good point, right? Like moving from a capital to an OpEx model really seems to help drive stuff forward in a city through their procurement. And I just want to harp on one thing though, right? I mean, looking at the citizen as the customer and that seamless customer journey. I gave the example of I wake up, I want to know my options based on whatever factor I prioritize, right, across buses, parking at the MARTA station, taking that train in, maybe taking an autonomous vehicle from the train to, my work or what have you, a shuttle even. To get to that point where you have that customer experience at front of mind, you have to break down those city walls, because citizens and customers, right, don't go through a city in a departmental manner. They don't say, okay, I'm going to go get on MARTA, so now I'm interacting with this department that has this data standards and these protocols, and now I'm getting off here to get on a shuttle that has to do with this data that's stored over there that doesn't interact with this system, so it can't be pulled into that mobile device. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done on even just within one city, the interoperability of these systems. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity, and I think a lot of folks in this room are already trying to play or are playing to help put it over the edge there.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
At least I can give you the Cisco perspective. I can give you the Cisco perspective at least. It's IoT and transportation is definitely an investment priority for us. If you listen, I know I talked about this earlier on, but if you listen to the last Senate hearing, the amount of investment that's actually going in, and some of the regulation that's just driving 90% or every car, if I heard it right, but every car 2018 onwards will have to have connectivity embedded in it, right? It's not an option anymore. I mean, I was in South Africa last week, and they're connecting with GM and a lot of other auto manufacturers, and they're Audi, Volkswagen, etc. And they're all starting to ship connected cars even in Africa now. And 90% plus cars will be connected by 2018. And just all the, I mean, there's just.
Yeah, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. You sound like you're making a connected car sales pitch, not a smart city sales pitch.
Well, I'm saying that, no, it's actually a fair opinion up until now. But the fact being that once we have all of these vehicles connected, right, it just doesn't stop there, right? If you look at the value stack that we're actually looking at, connectivity is number one, and then we kind of build on top of that. So if you look at the infrastructure that's starting to get connected, in fact, I think it was Senator Fox who said that data is the new asphalt for transportation networks, right? And so I think just all the regulation and the investment that's going in, I definitely see us crossing the chasm in about 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I put my hand up for 10, and I think it depends. I think I could see 5 years, depending on how you define what smart cities is, right? See, that's the issue, right? Because we've seen so many different, I mean, everyone's seen every slide deck, and you've seen it, the definition of smart city is sort of dependent on where you sit. And so there are going to be proposals and big money and lots of opportunities within certain aspects of what smart cities would be, but it might not be the whole pie, right? So you may be bidding on an infrastructure deal that has elements in there that are very much smart, right? That's a smart city deal that will catapult you across the chasm, but maybe most of it's still traditional, depends on where you are. In the traditional, true private industry sense, I think 10 years, but in the government sense, you probably can make some big money over the next 5.
Yeah, just to also comment on the connected cars piece. There's about 250 million cars in the United States. The average car is still over 10 years old, right? So new cars are coming out rapidly connected, that's true. But the city cares about all cars, and many, many cars are not going to be connected, and they have this problem of this mixed environment that they have to deal with, and I think that's where we can help them as well. There's certainly lots of aftermarket ways to do some of that too, which could accelerate the process, but the reality is just the way people buy and use, et cetera, is going to take a while. One of the big issues for most OEMs now is actually second and third owners with connectivity, right? BMW came out a few years ago with 10 years of connectivity-based safety and security, and they got to make sure people keep it, hot, essentially second, third owners. OnStar, same problem. Cars connected, but it's not turned on. Subscription isn't being paid for, right? So there's no data coming out. OnStar tried in 2011, you may recall, to change the terms and conditions of their agreement to say, we're going to continue to collect data from your car even if you're not a subscriber anymore. And some blogger figured that out in about 5 seconds and shamed them and named them. And they didn't change the terms and conditions after that because, privacy rules, et cetera. So it's just the sheer reality of the size of the market. It needs to change, and it's going to take a while, I think, still.
Other questions? So the question is, so think comprehensively of all the things, of the different technology platforms and connectivities that may not all be on the same plane. How would we, the panelists, consider, going after such a situation so that we can actually have solutions that can cross all different kinds of complex platforms?
So I'll kind of respond to a part of it, right? I think while we have these silos with different modes of operations and different modes of transportation, right? I think technologically, I think, going back to the first presentation that we just saw with ThinkTech, right? Platforms and the likes of platforms across these different silos, allowing these multimodal, seamless visualization for all different modes of operations, I think will play a key role. And I can tell you an example from Singapore with their Land and Transport Authority, where they're already starting to, I don't know where they're in their deployment right now, but they're already looking at charging taxes or toll on roadways based on the number of miles that the driver is going to drive in a year, and not necessarily what toll booths they're going to cross, right? So, and to do that, they've had to have a horizontal platform that kind of ties in multiple different segments.
You have a better answer than I did. I was going to say, I want to see a city figure out interoperability before a country, let alone multiple countries. I think the platform answer is really good. And, IBM has the IOC, Cisco has CDP, right? There's different pieces in play at kind of the macro level, but I think there's a lot of room for disruption and opportunity for folks to come in and do it better, right?
Let me see if I can say it. So the statement or the comment was, she's a hardware producer for all of the things that are happening up here, and the question is, the end user wants their software to be all very different. So how do you handle, maybe it's not a question, the point is, differentiation is still leading the way, which makes it difficult to have a comprehensive solution. So the question is, the assumption will be at some point everything will be the same, even though the differentiation has always been the goal. So the question is, how do we see that taking place? I will just start off by saying, how many of you all have Android phones versus iPhone phones, right? That's where the chasm begins and ends, right? Because until iOS and Android become one platform, I would say that's the start of sort of it will never be one. I think that Tim Cook until he dies and somebody else behind him decides to throw in with Android or vice versa. That's going to be tough. So.
I mean, that plays out in the car business, right? CarPlay and Android Auto are all in. Car companies don't like it because now somebody's got a hold of the center stack, right? But they don't have a choice because they can't not have both, right? Audi, for example, had its own plus Android Auto and CarPlay, and guess who uses what? So that's going to happen. I think. Differentiation, I get the same question all the time too. How are we going to be different with our connected program, right? It's the same, well, to some extent, ease of use and integration and partnership so I can do these different things are going to lead, right? It's all about user experience at the end of the day. If the user experience is really good, you start to build a wall around your brand and people don't jump over it, right? I mean, Apple's the case for that. Once you have a phone and a computer and cloud all connect, you don't jump to something else. It's just the barriers are too high now. And lots of companies are trying to do that in IoT, and I think how they can integrate the best is probably the way they win and differentiate themselves.
I think, on behalf of the panelists and myself, I want to thank you all for your attention.